London was not, in my view, although there was a lot of activity, sufficiently consulted on the setting of missions, on the change from OHA to the CPA, from Ghana to Bremer, on the early decrees, and on the setting of resources for the whole task. We were always, by experience in Iraq, from history, and in the nature of the British, more pessimistic about what was going to happen than were the Americans. And we never, I think, got the Americans to understand that in the post-conflict area, they were taking on a more difficult mission than the invasion itself. That lay behind our absence of resources. You then have to add to that the reluctance of any government, and every government in this country, to spend resources when they don't necessarily see the proof of their being needed. It is in the nature of a democracy always to under-resource and not to preempt and not to insure, because the Treasury will always argue against that. It's too expensive. As it happened, Iraq became more expensive because we didn't do those things, because we didn't insure. We carried our own insurance, and it was very expensive. But it was in the nature of the British machine not to cover every eventuality, because fundamentally it was unaffordable.
So we were in the situation of willing the ends but not the means.
Correct.
And in this fundamental failure, as you see it, at the very outset, you say that we were not consulted, or not sufficiently consulted. Was that because at the highest levels we were not being assertive enough in putting forward our point of view and demanding to be consulted, and this more pessimistic assessment that we had?
No, it's more complex than that. First of all, in the American view, we were a very welcome and a very capable partner, but we were a very low-quantity partner. I won't say junior partner, but we were a low-quantity partner. Second, the Pentagon were planning for this in the way that they did plan, on the assumption that the United States might be the only country executing this plan to invade Iraq and get rid of Saddam Hussein. You'll remember that Secretary Rumsfeld said in January or February 2003, we will go and do this whether or not the Brits are with us. They were planning to do the whole thing, if necessary, whether or not they had allies. Thirdly, it's in the American frame of mind, as you've heard from other witnesses, to do things on the basis of American decision-making, American resources, American self-reliance, with other partners being very welcome to add things where they can, but this mainly being an American enterprise.
But if I can just interrupt you there. When the British government took the decision between the different military options that it was presented with to go for the largest, including a division-level land force, a strong part of the argumentation, as we have heard for that, was that this would give us significant influence over the way that the operation was conducted. So do you think that London failed to appreciate that despite that decision, that we were, as you put it, a low-quantity partner? Did they think we were a high-quantity partner because of that decision?
No, they understood that the Americans were in the lead and that they would have to rely on good American decision-making and resource allocation to get this thing done well. In British terms, it was an enormous expedition, military expeditionary force, to be sent to Iraq to win one part of the country and to hold that part of the country. And if you look at the record of what we did in the southeast, we eventually did it actually very competently up to a certain point in time until our shelf life ran out in Iraq. It was a well-executed job that the British did in the southeast, but in doing that job in the southeast, we added very little to what the coalition as a whole was doing in the rest of Iraq.
So it didn't give us the big influence that we hoped it was going to give us.
It gave us the influence to make our own decisions in the southeast and to be relied upon by the Americans to do that properly, but it did not give us the weight of voice in Baghdad for the whole administration of Iraq that equated with what the Security Council resolution said. But I think, actually, Sir Roderick, that London understood that.
You said that Ambassador Bremer didn't show you the ICRC report on Abu Ghraib when it was sent to him. And you said separately that there was a lot of American material that you never saw. To what extent did Bremer, sitting across the corridor with your joint staffs in between you, keep you fully briefed on what he was up to?
He did not keep me fully briefed. He never intended to keep me fully briefed on everything he was up to. The non-Americans in the CPA, and quite a few of the Americans, did not see anything of the American spending of money and budget allocations. We were not consulted on the budget allocations that Bremer and David Oliver in the early stages and others prepared for the spending of American and Iraqi money in Iraq. We did not see anything whatsoever in the oil sector. They kept that very closely American because they wanted to run the oil sector. There were Australians and Poles and others at quite a senior level who were advising them on some aspects of this, but no non-Americans were taken into the American confidence on the spending of money and the management of the oil sector in Iraq. I think those are two of the clearest examples of how partial the partnership was on the ground with the Americans.
Why were they seeking, I think this is an important point for the public interest, why were they seeking to have this control of the oil sector?
I think they felt that they understood the oil sector. They brought in American oil executives to advise them on this and to run that part of the CPA. They knew that management of the oil sector was going to be vital for the supply of finance into the Iraqi system, and they wanted to be responsible for it themselves. There might have been a minor angle of thinking that they wanted access to the contracts that might come out of the oil sector and the Iraqi economy at a subsequent period. But the Americans were doing 95% of the work and putting in more than 95% of the money. I wouldn't like to say that they were not justified in taking that approach.
But you would regard that as a minor aspect of their thinking on this?
I don't think it was, certainly if we're going to get into the oil sector, the Americans had no intention to take over and own the oil sector. That was always a canard in public criticism terms of what the invasion was about. It was not about oil. I think they just felt that this was such an important area that they would run it themselves. They ran the replacement of the currency with immense competence and efficiency, run by an American with one Brit on board in the team, but primarily as an American exercise, and it was wonderfully done.